connecting the global FinTech community. I'm Stacey Jafta, and today I'll be talking with Hamish Houston, MD of Network International in Southern Africa. For over 25 years, Network International has delivered innovative solutions that drive revenue and profitability for their customers. This philosophy has seen them grow to be the largest acquirer in the UAE and the leading enabler of digital commerce in the Middle East and African region. Hi, Hamish. Lovely having you on the show. How are you doing?
Very good. Thank you, Stacey. How are you?
Good. How's the last couple of weeks and months been?
It's been interesting. Obviously, personally, incredibly privileged that I can actually say that I've enjoyed the last few weeks. And I realize that is a real privilege just because typically my working life involves a lot of travel.
Mm-hmm.
And so being in one place and, being able to walk out of my study straight back into family life a couple of times a day has been amazing.
Yeah.
So, no, I've actually quite enjoyed it. Obviously, you get a bit of cabin fever and those types of things. But, yeah, it's been good. I think the one impressive thing has been how, the teams generally, not just our organization, but in other related companies have managed to work from home and sort of create this new normal. And I think it's a lot of it will persist long after the current lockdown.
Did you guys have much remote work pre-COVID-19?
We've always had sort of a kind of a flexi policy.
Mm-hmm.
So people do work, from home or wherever they are. And particularly, obviously, if a large part of your team are traveling, then.
Mm-hmm.
But it's certainly ramped up dramatically. It's curious. Literally just a couple of weeks before the crisis really hit, we signed for new office premises, that are twice the size of the existing one.
No.
No, I think it's clear that the future work situation is going to be more of a balance, I think. So,
definitely.
We're fortunate that we're growing and there's opportunities to grow. I think this working from home is definitely gonna stay. And one thing I've found, and I think a lot of people find, and I know there's this, it's very trendy to say how busy you are, but genuinely the last few weeks have been crazily busy. And I think the productivity that people have demonstrated by working from home, and also reclaiming that couple of hours a day that they would have wasted commuting, has been very beneficial both to the individual and the organization as well.
Yeah, I've noticed that as well within our team. Even when it comes to communication, something that could go either way, we've been better than ever. A conversation I've been having with quite a few different companies is the potential of hiring candidates maybe in a completely different region, seeing how remote working has positively impacted their team dynamic. Could you see yourself doing that?
100%. Absolutely. Yeah, no, I think that's very much the case. Honestly, we're a regional organization ourselves. And so one of the things we, would consider anyway is where we, cite our centers of excellence. But I think it's certainly brought to the fore the fact that you don't need people crammed into one office space. And so, yeah, no, definitely it's a consideration. And I know I've seen, you would have seen the news about, Zuckerberg's plan to adjust salaries, saying you can be based anywhere, but your salary will be normalized to the location that you're in once a year. So, yeah, I think it's definitely a trend. Why would you want to live in a big city when you could, be somewhere more conducive to a good work-life balance, but still work for a leading company?
Yeah, I am so interested to see what the next couple of months are going to look like, even the next year or two. I think things are going to change a lot. We also see how quickly everyone's adapting to this new method of working.
Completely. Yeah, absolutely.
In your career, you have been a part of Network International since day one, to a degree through different means. Tell me about your story leading up to that and how you landed the position of MD of Southern Africa.
So I'll just clarify something. So, I ended up at Network through acquisition rather than being, Network has been around since the mid-90s, I think it was. But the organization that was started in South Africa was essentially acquired twice and ended up in Network International. So, I was at the start of a processor that we built here. So a FinTech business in South Africa based in Cape Town. And then through a couple of different iterations ended up as part of Network International by acquisition. Like most people, I didn't have any idea what I wanted to do leaving school. My parents wanted me to be a lawyer. And I tried a couple of years of law at university and kind of hated it and realized it wasn't for me. And so bumbled around and purely by chance ended up in technology because it seemed like a growing industry. After joining an organization that was very much a sort of generic, you call them a reseller of technology, I then moved into a niche which kind of suited me well, which has always been the sort of commercialization of new technologies or new trends that are moving. I've spent quite a lot of time in that space, both here, the UK, and then also in regional roles. So, for example, the current focus on Africa as an example. So it's really about, trying to help cross the chasm, to quote Jeffrey Moore, in the adoption of new technologies. Fundamentally, though, I'm really just a generalist, right? So I'm just I have no specialist skills in any specific space. I'm not a techie. I'm not an accountant. I'm just a generalist.
Do you like that?
I think there's not many generalists around. So yeah, no, I quite enjoy it. I mean, the obvious benefit is that you get exposed to a broader set of things, and in some instances, it's very useful. So particularly as the organization that I've been involved with, essentially I've been sitting at the same desk, figuratively, for the last 16 years or whatever it is. Particularly when you're in a startup mode, you need to be adaptive. You can't just be one thing. And that's probably less true in a large organization, unless you're higher up the chain. So having spent a few years in these sort of commercialization roles, I realized the one thing that was sort of lacking was a specific business skill set. And so, what's it now, 17 years ago, 2003, I was living in the UK. I came back to South Africa specifically to go to business school. And I thought that would round out some of the skills that I was lacking. And really enjoyed that. It was highly beneficial to me. And after that, we tried to launch a consulting business, but focused again in that sweet spot of trying to help technology businesses, guys with good ideas, but not necessarily the commercial acumen to get them launched. We tried to bridge that gap. It wasn't much of a success for a number of environmental factors in at the time, I think, and probably personal factors as well. And I ended up being approached by a couple of guys who owned a credit risk consulting business. And after a few conversations with them, they had a couple of ventures that they had sort of conceptualized but hadn't done anything with. And one of them was this concept of a third-party processing business in Cape Town. And so they hired me to get it off the ground. And essentially that's the journey that I'm still on, is that we dug a very big hole for a few years in trying to get the business off the ground. Their then shareholders sort of ran out of patience. And said basically they're going to shut it down or it could be bought out. And so there was a management buyout in 2008. And then essentially we rolled that into a private equity-backed group. It was backed by a crowd called Actis, who were building a sort of pan-African payments business. And we called it Emerging Market Payments, and we became part of Emerging Market Payments, which was a really, really interesting journey. It was eye-opening for me just in terms of the broader African payment space, what was happening in the Middle East, as well as an introduction into having private equity as shareholders and the expectations of that. That was a very interesting journey. And then, like all private equity journeys, it was going to end at some point. And essentially that EMP group was sold to Network International in 2015. And that's why I ended up where I am at the moment.
And then how did you end up landing the position of MD? How many years in between from day one of starting there to landing that position?
Yeah, so I mean, there was a kind of I suppose by natural succession in some ways, in that the processing business that was started out of that credit risk consulting, one of the original founders and the funder of the business, he essentially cashed in his chips at the last transaction with Actis. And at the time I was COO, which is essentially, dog's body, doing anything and everything from sales to, we took turns buying the milk for the coffee in the office, and, all that kind of small company stuff. So I took over from him when he cashed in his chips and decided to retire and fly his plane and play golf and that type of thing. And then, post the acquisition of Network, there was a slight, restructure in terms of focus. So that's kind of how I end up where I am now. We were essentially, it was a very nice business. It was relatively niche and relatively small. The CEO of Network described it well as a boutique business. But now being part of something far greater, both in terms of obviously scale, but also the breadth, is very, very interesting. That's the exciting journey of the last 15 or 16 years.
Time has probably flown by. We spoke quite a bit over the last couple of weeks about salespeople, because one of your first jobs you ever got out of uni was in sales. Do you think that anyone can be a salesperson, and what does it take to be a successful one?
That's a very key question. I think there's a couple of things there. One is, I kind of naturally gravitated to sales, although I'd never considered it as a career. I think there's a lot of myths in popular culture, if you like, around the natural born salesperson, and then there's the negative connotations of used car salespeople, and it's not all positive.
Yeah, quite a bit.
Yeah. Do I think anyone could be a salesperson? I think most people can. I firmly believe that sales is a process, and it's process driven, and people can learn that process. I think there's a couple of personality dependencies which are important in good salespeople, but they're not prerequisites. But you have to be engaging, you have to be likable, you have to be able to get across the door. Obviously, good communication skills are very key. But I don't believe in that natural born salesperson. I think it might work in some environments, maybe if you're a car salesman or something like that. But in a B2B environment, it's certainly not the case. You have to very much focus on the value that you're creating and understand. I mean, the first step of sales, obviously, it's a cliche, is the listening part, is to understand what problem your client has, and then trying to position what solution you have to fill that problem, to solve that problem. I do believe that people can be groomed into being good salespeople. My theory is that it is a very specific life cycle of sales or process that you've driven, and essentially you just need to manage the progression through that cycle. I firmly believe that most people could eventually become a good salesperson.
What if somebody who is newly entering the sales space is like, I have so much drive in me, I want to be successful? What advice do you have for me?
So I think there's some fundamental skills that are useful. And I mean, there's obviously, thousands of books have been written about sales. It's an interesting, just slight digression. I think it's well put that, you can spend 3 years doing a bachelor's degree and then a year and doing your honors and a couple of years doing a master's, all in the commerce faculty of a university, and you won't attend a single lecture on how to sell.
So true.
But it is the most fundamental part of almost any business, no matter what you're in. And I think that, that's a lost opportunity. So, there's thousands of books that are written about how to sell. So I think there's value, firstly, in understanding a methodology, and there's so many of them. But essentially, that methodology is just understanding, again, going back to that life cycle, is how you understand needs, how you progress through those stages, and there's many of them out there. So that would be a first step, is to make sure that you understand the process. If you understand, the process of sales, and then I think the other bit, which is really useful if you're selling. It's a cliche term, but solutions essentially is if it's not just things that come off the shelf in large volumes, then understanding what builds a business case for your customers. So how do they justify this investment? How do they sell it internally? Because it's very rarely that people want something and there isn't some competing budget issue internally. So that that talks to the part finance, part just basic mathematics, commercial mathematics. Those are the sort of the fundamental things that I think are important yeah, in a salesperson, and the foundation skills that people should have.
Over the next couple of months, we're looking to add a few sales positions onto my team, and I've done a few interviews. And I see that salespeople are so great at selling themselves, and it's really difficult to know if they're going to succeed in the position. When interviewing, what do you specifically look out for, and how do you pick the right salesperson?
So, I mean, the easiest thing, but it's the obvious thing, is a track record. But that's the assuming that you don't have necessarily a track record, and you're hiring for potential rather than experience. There's a couple of things that I think are very important. Is the first question is, do I see myself buying from this person? And again, that comes back to, are they engaging? Do they understand what it is that they're trying to position?
I love that.
And then, do they have the right skills? So, and those skills may be, depending on the role. If it's a junior person, you're not necessarily looking for the final product, but do they have the necessary understanding of commercial elements of whatever it is that they're going to have the context to be able to position the solution. But then one of the very important things, I think, is in that interview process is, do they naturally display those sales abilities? So are they asking probing questions about the role, about what's going to bring you to a decision make around who you're going to appoint? Do they try and close effectively? Do they understand what next steps are in the hiring process? And that's very indicative of how they would manage a sales opportunity, I think.
I think that's actually a great point. Something that I learned very early on in my career is the importance of actually interviewing the hiring manager. And I think that so many candidates are so afraid of impressing the person that's interviewing them, that they forget that you actually also have the power to accept or reject this role. And I think this is great advice for anyone going through the interview process, is don't be afraid to ask as many questions as possible, as many hiring managers actually enjoy that and see the importance of having somebody that's really invested in the company, invested in the position. And I saw that changed the dynamic so much in the interview process when I changed my mindset to, okay, I'm here to impress, I want to get this job, to going in there, telling them about myself, telling them about what I have to give, but then also showing that, listen, I'm also here to find out if this job is actually good for me. Is this company, do they have the same values that I have? I think that was life-changing in my interview experience, and I actually love interviews. I'm a little bit weird, like I get an adrenaline rush from them, but I think for anyone out there that's interviewing either for the first time or is struggling or getting nervous, I think that's really a great point.
I think the other, exactly on that is, it's unlikely in a sales or an interview that you're going to get the job in the first discussion. So any engagement is an opportunity to learn more and thereby refine your positioning as the answer to that problem. And so, eventually you'll meet with a decision maker who, is unlikely to be the first person that you meet with unless it's a smaller organization. So yeah, exactly. Ask lots of questions, understand more about what the company's looking for, where they're headed, and that just enables you to refine your positioning of what you bring to the table.
Exactly. And then not every successful salesman can be a successful sales manager. What do you think are those differentiating factors?
Yeah, I mean, that's just a classic mistake organizations make many, many times is, they promote their best salesperson to be a sales manager. And it's very akin to the difference between a great, sportsman and a great coach. Many great coaches were good players in their own right, but the skills required to be a good sportsman versus a coach are very, very different. So the first thing there, I think, is people skills. At the end of the day, sales management is about managing people rather than it is about managing the sales process. Obviously, a good understanding of sales is required in that role because you need to understand the context that your people are working within. So to me, that is absolutely the primary skill. And then, the ability to be a good mentor is another one. It's there's probably some environments where sales is a very hard game, where essentially you're managing people in and out, and sink or swim type thing. But generally in B2B, there's going to be a lot of coaching, and it's going to be a consultative process, and therefore your sales manager needs to be supportive in that environment. So it's not unlike general management in managing people, but with a specific focus on enabling your salespeople, who at the end of the day, one of the few things that is relatively unique about sales is the fact that you can have the world's best quarter or month or year or whatever it might be, but that's, you start from scratch again the next period. And
used to drive me crazy.
Yeah, exactly.
You would nail your target for the month, and then you would go in fresh the next month and have to build it all the way up.
So your last quarter is actually no good to you, other than for setting expectations that you're going to do better next quarter. That is a unique thing, and I think that goes back to the previous question around what type of people are good salespeople. At the end of the day, it is a pressured environment. You have to be able to deal with that kind of pressure.
Resilience all the way through.
Completely, very resilient, optimistic type people.
Talking about resilience, when you were at asset processing and things were taking longer than expected, you weren't racking up sales the way you expected to or anticipated, what stopped you from just throwing in the towel, and what kept you motivated?
I think that's a great question, and I think doubt is the demon that faces many new startup businesses, particularly those in high growth. At the end of the day, I think it comes down to two things. One, and they're so closely linked. One is the belief in the purpose. So if you still believe that you have a reason to succeed, and the small incremental wins that you might have, although the growth may not be coming as fast as you like, the fact that you still believe in the opportunity that you're chasing. And then the related one to that is the people that you work with. And those two will go hand in hand. And so it was very much the fact that we had an incredibly strong team of great professionals. We were firmly of the belief that the business was always going to be a success. It was just a question of how quickly we could get to that successful point. And it certainly took longer than we expected. But then again, it was a journey that was enjoyable. It was challenging. It was a lot of sleepless nights, but also some real highs. And so, it was, I suppose, that focus on and belief in the people around you, really. Again, not to overplay the sporting metaphor, but it was very much like being in a team sport, really. You just got to believe that you're all heading in the right direction. So was it more believing in the team than the product, or a mixture of the two? Oh, no. I think you'd be deluded if you had a great team and were chasing the wrong target.
I hate my product, but I love my team.
Yeah, that's when a business needs to pivot. And there's probably quite a few of those out there. But no, it was very much in both of those. So we had a problem that we were clearly going to solve, and we were going to solve it well. It took longer than expected to get to that point that we were doing it at scale, but it was definitely the mission, if you like, and supported by the people. You went through a couple of acquisitions and ultimately watched the company scale. What needed to be done differently, and how did you prepare to scale? So I think and this talks to some of my previous experience as well. In previous roles elsewhere, is that. The good and bad of mergers and acquisitions is that very often it's easy to acquire companies. It's far harder to make those acquisitions successful. And the history of corporate finance is littered with the corpses of organizations that have failed and withered on the vine. And I've seen both sides of that. The clear rationale. So the clear thing that's needed is a rationale for the acquisition, rather than just the numbers looking good on a spreadsheet. And then the second part of that is, okay, how do you actually make this work? So operationalizing the integration of two organizations is a massive task, just in terms of the change management, the people management, and we obviously saw it at a different scale. So asset processing was a small business, effectively, less than 50 people. We became part of the EMP group, which was larger, distributed, Pan-African with and Middle East as well. And we were a reasonably large-scale organization, and then we were acquired by Network International, which is the largest payments business in the Middle East and Africa. Very different scale. And obviously with that comes the good and the bad. We had access to a whole bunch of new and interesting things, new markets. In the smaller environment, like I said earlier, there were times when we would take turns buying the milk and the coffee, and everything was very, very much a smaller family. And now, there's people. I suppose your job becomes a lot more within a very defined remit. And compartmentalized, I suppose. In terms of preparing to scale, I think, the sooner you as an individual can work within the new environment, whether those are constraints or opportunities, and, get to know who else is helpful to you within an organization. And I would say helpful to you in performing your task, the better. And, that's one thing that I've seen for the good and the bad. Some people resist reaching out to their new colleagues, and it hinders them, whereas others sort of the ones who are inevitably successful, I think, are the ones who are more proactive in embracing the larger organization, and that's where the company benefits.
Well, Hamish, thank you so much for being on the podcast. It is always a delight getting to chat with you. Where's the best place for listeners to reach you and to find you?
So I'm available on LinkedIn. There's not many Hamish Houstons out there. I think there's a couple of us. I'm not the country music singer. So.
I'll definitely make note of that, and I'll link everything in the description below. Thank you again for being on the podcast. I appreciate your time.
Stacey, thank you very much. Always a pleasure to chat to you.
Of course. Thank you for listening to Talking Success, connecting the global fintech community. Feel free to follow us on Instagram at Talent in the Cloud. And if you're interested in exec talent, or you yourself are looking for a new exciting change in your career, check out our website, talentinthecloud.io.